discussions, whatever we're going to do. And that's that we're going to listen to these teachings so we can develop our own amazing potential so that we can be of benefit to others as an enlightened being, which the Buddha says is the potential of every one of us. This is our reason. We think long term. His Holiness says always aspire to do what's most beneficial. If we can, long term better than short term. So of course, long term benefit, the long term goal is one's own buddhahood, and that's the reason for doing what we do, thinking this way. And this prayer expresses that. Sangye charang choke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye dropasho sangye charang choke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye dropasho Sangye chadang soke chognam la jancho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye dropasho. All right, so given that there's a whole mix of it here, let's look at all the main points. And if we've heard this 1,000 times or we've heard it never before, like I mentioned last night, maybe we listen as if we're hearing it freshly. It's the best way to listen. Because every time we hear the same simple words, we hear it more deeply. And that's really what practice is. So you could say that actually what the essence, if you were there last night, you would have heard, if the essence of Buddhist practice is actually working on your mind, that's the actual job. That's the actual job, changing your mind, ridding the mind of the neuroses and growing the virtues. That's essentially what you're doing. That's the essence of it. That's it. That's the job. All the way to Buddhahood. That's what you're doing. But there are lots of ways of doing it. Lots of ways of supporting that practice, put it that way. So, often we're so confused when we hear about spiritual practices. We imagine, spiritual is, this kind of thing would be a spiritual practice, visualizing, saying prayers, saying mantras. That sounds like a spiritual practice. But sitting there in the daytime while you're doing the dishes, observing how you're angry because your husband isn't helping you, and you change your mind right there, that's the actual practice. That's the reason you're doing the other things. So for me, the simple way to put it, and this is a kind of dumb analogy, but for me, in my mind, it works. If you want to, I'm stupid. I always use Michael Jordan as the example when I'm in the States. I'm probably a grandfather by now. Like if you want to play basketball, and you say, "Hey, Michael, please show me how to get the ball in the hoop," because you can see with basketball, the point is to get as many balls in the hoop. That's what basketball is. And then he'll proceed to tell you to go off for 5 or 10 years and study basketball this and go to university and learn all the theories and then learn all these things and go and get fit and eat this food and do those things and do jogging. And you'll say, "No, Michael, you didn't hear me. How do I get the ball in the hoop?" And he'll repeat his answer. Because it looks easy to get the ball in the hoop, but you've got to do so much work, don't you, to prime yourself to do what looks so simple. And that's the point here. It sounds easy to be your own therapist, as Lam Rim would put it. That's what you're doing as a Buddhist. That sounds easy. It is easy. It's really easy to say it, and the job is not complicated. The only reason it's difficult for us, like getting the ball in the hoop, is because we're not ready. We're not capable. We haven't got all the other incredible skills. We haven't primed ourselves. We haven't primed our mind to be able to do the job of seeing the mind, So, I remember a friend of mine went off and did a year's retreat in one of these quite a few Tibetan Buddhist retreat centers in France. She went from New York, and did 1 year. She went back home. She said, "Robina, I had to go back. I just began to see my mind." She did another year. I just began to see my mind. So the level to which we need to go into our minds in order to unravel, unpack and deconstruct and change and regrow, reconstruct our mind till eventually it's in sync with being a Buddha's mind is way, way, way beyond anything we would imagine therapy or unconscious or subconscious. The level to which the delusions and neuroses in our mind, which for the Buddha are the cause of all suffering, in all universes are so primordial. So it is a long-term job. But once we understand what the job is, then we're not confused. And one of the commonest things that happens when we come into, say, Tibetan Buddhist places and hear all the stuff and hear all the philosophy and hear how they study for 30 years in the monasteries and all these tantric things, and it just seems beyond impossible. It seems so complex. And then we do something like mindfulness and we think, oh yeah, that sounds like that's the real point, you know. So when we understand where all that fits, then it makes sense to us. You know? Because if there's anything in the Buddhist practice that isn't helping you change your mind, then it is merely ritual and superstition, and you should stop doing it. So everything, this is why it's so important, we need, especially us Westerners who come into this completely foreign packaging, you know, this foreign teachings, we need to understand the logic of it. And this takes time, but we have to work with that assumption. Work with that assumption that every single thing we're doing in this room, including the prayers, including the visualization, including offering that mandala, if it isn't finally to help your mind, if it isn't finally a thing that you do that will increase your ability to grow your potential and lessen your neuroses, then it's a complete and total waste of time. It is merely superstition, and you shouldn't do it. So it's so important to understand that. In one of the Lam Rim texts of Lama Tsongkhapa, who's like the 14th century lineage Lama of our tradition, of our Lamas in the center and so on, my teachers, the text called Songs of Experience. He says, you know, all the teachings are to be taken as sound advice because there is no contradiction between scripture and practice. So if you had a recipe book, you would say that. You would say all the recipes in this book are advice. Every word in this book is necessarily advice on how to cook, because there is not any contradiction between the recipes and the cake. In other words, every word in that book, you know, has to be to help you make cakes. And look at the rigor and discipline and checking and clarity and precision that we use just to write a recipe book. And this is the same kind of clarity and precision we need to apply here, which is very contradictory to our view, what we think spiritual is. And that's reasonable, because if we come from creative religions, which are the usual religions we know about, then necessarily it is mysterious, it is mystical, it is a mystery. I remember talking to some Catholic nuns in Berkeley one time, asking questions. I really like asking these questions, you know, discussing these things. And they kept saying, oh no, we don't know, it's a mystery. I said, but don't you want to know? No, they said, I'm not criticizing. No, we will know when we go to heaven with God. And that's that style. And so necessarily the Christian teaching, the Muslim teachings, to some extent have to be mystical, because it's God's plan. And it's very rude of us to butt our nose in God's plan, you know. But that's not the point in Buddhism. When we understand really clearly and get the experiential implication of this point, the Buddha was a regular person who became an enlightened being. And every single word of Buddhism is his findings. Every single word of all the most esoteric teachings are all directly sourced back to the Buddha in different ways. It's harder to see it somehow. The more esoteric teachings, the practice that we're doing here in this week, you know, in this 9 days, is coming from the esoteric teachings called Buddhist Tantra. And although most of those teachings were given by the Buddha, but to yogis in their meditations at a subtler level, which of course makes us, you know, it doesn't seem immediately easy to check all this. Even the Bodhisattva teachings aren't necessarily given by Mr. Buddha in his yellow robe sitting there in India, you know. They're given at different levels, but they all have to be checked as valid coming back to the Buddha. And one needs to have some confidence in this. Otherwise, it's just mysterious and superstition and something else, something's made up. And we tend to think that is spiritual, which is really kind of irresponsible. You know, a point I made last night, if we come into something like Buddhism, then we have to really have some confidence that it's a valid system, not just some series of strange experiences, which is how we tend to think of spiritual. It's got to be a valid system, and that means that when you start to listen to it, it's got to be coherent, and it takes time to see this. But if it's valid, it must be coherent. And each piece, every time you hear one more piece, it must help you with the bigger picture. Like each piece is a new piece of the puzzle falling into place, if it's a valid system. And that's what we have to have confidence, you know. So, of course, we're the boss. We don't need to practice all of it. We can decide we just want to watch our breath. That's our call. We can decide we really like to do Vajrasattva. We're not interested in listening to the philosophy. That's okay. We're the boss, not the Buddha. But if we want to do what the Buddha is saying, which is achieve the goal of perfection, buddhahood, enlightenment, which is this psychological state that he says every single being naturally possesses the potential to achieve, then we've got to look at the big picture, you know, and it's a long term. So, okay, let's put this practice that we're doing in the context of the bigger picture. And this is something marvelous about the way the Tibetans over the centuries have packaged the teachings. It's one of the things that's unique to the Tibetans, which is just such the most marvelous offering. You know, Atisha in the 11th century, this Indian master, scholar, saint, you know, yogi, was invited by the Tibetan king, whoever it was at the time, I don't know, sometime in 1000 something. He was invited to come and teach in Tibet. And in fact, he stayed there the remaining 14, 17 years or something of his life. And Dharma had been there a couple of hundred years already, maybe 800 and something, 700 and something. It first came. You know, Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava is famous as one of the, you know, the main bringers of Buddhism from India to Tibet. And of course, because he was a great tantric yogi, that's the shape and the form that Buddhism took in Tibet. But when Atisha got there, and this is putting it, you know, kind of a bit colloquially, he could see that, you know, Dharma was flourishing, but it sort of lost the plot a bit. There was no real overview of how everything fit together in a coherent piece. And again, I have to stress this one so strongly. You know, when we learn anything in our life, we're very good at learning things in our culture. We know whether it's music or cooking or acupuncture, it's got to be coherent and intelligent and reasonable and part of a big picture. It can't just be random things. You just, well, how do you make a cake? And there's no real system and you just cross your fingers and hope for the best. That's how we think of spiritual, which is really insulting. We know it's got to be coherent, and we're brilliant at this. We can learn the most amazing systems, cooking, computers, you name it. Well, the same here. It's got to be consistent and coherent, you know. So that means we've got to, and also we do know when we learn things, we start small and you graduate at the end. You start at the beginning, you start at grade 1 and you graduate. You go gradually. Well, this packaging of the teachings that is based upon the simple text that Atisha wrote back in whatever it was, 1000 and something, called lamp for the path, the light that guides you on your map, basically. The light that guides you on your way. What he did was take the essential points of all of Buddha's teachings, all the metaphysics, all the psychology, all the meditation, all the philosophy, and he took it and presented it in a nice, orderly way, which is exactly how we would study something. And so it became known, especially in our tradition, the Gelugpas from Lama Tsongkhapa, it became known as the Lam Rim, which means gradual, path, road, gradual path. Well, they call it the gradual path. Well, it's cute. Well, actually, it's a medieval phrase for what we would use, a course. It means a course, gradual path. Listen to the words. We would say it's a course, and we understand that word instantly. I'm going to do a course, and we know immediately what you're saying. You go to some place that's valid, got decent teachers, got a decent system. You start at grade 1 and you go through, and then you graduate on this gradual path. That's all the Lam Rim is. It's a course. So what are you going to graduate as? A Buddha. So all the teachings, all of Buddha's teachings, if you opened any Buddhist book just randomly and found a sentence somewhere, you know, or in the teachings, let's say, the philosophical teaching, you just pick it up and I'll see, a sentence, behavioral implications of working with the concept of emptiness. There's a heading. You would immediately know where that fits in the course. You would know immediately. Just like you're a musician. You just hear one phrase of music, you would know the level of difficulty of that piece of music if you're knowledgeable about music. And that's reasonable. And that's actually, I know when I first heard this about Buddhism, I kind of found it boring because I had all these misconceptions of what I thought a spiritual path was. I didn't know what it was. When I had my first teachings from Lama Zopa, a 1-month intensive Lam Rim course in Queensland, I was completely drowning in confusion. I had so many misconceptions that I couldn't hear what he was saying. I kept thinking to myself, where's the Buddhism? I had no idea what I thought it was, but I had some weird ideas, that's for sure. You know? So anyway, this Lam Rim, you start in junior school. And junior school and high school, you could say there's an analogy in Buddhism, which I love and I use a lot, and I find it very helpful, that a bird needs 2 wings, wisdom and compassion. Well, the wisdom wing is all the teachings that we know in the world that are called the Theravada teachings, the teachings that are in Burma and Thailand, that kind of convey the classic image of a monk in his, yellow robes walking around with his begging bowl. They are the manifest, and that's the way the Buddha looks. Usually the statue of the Buddha manifesting in that shape and form as a monk. That's the manifestation of the level of practice in junior school and high school. Or that's the wisdom wing, and all of that is the work of working deeply on your own mind, understanding your mind, understanding suffering, understanding karma, understanding the nature of mind. What are delusions? Learning to meditate, learning to become your own therapist. This is all that work, which is the classic image a person has of a Buddhist. That's junior school and high school. And if you graduate there, you achieve your own nirvana, your own liberation. You've cut the root of delusions from your mind. You've cut all the root of suffering. You've seen emptiness. You no longer need to be reborn in samsara. You're finished. You've done the job. But you can do more. You can go to the compassion wing. That's university. And that's all the teachings about bodhicitta and love and compassion, which is continuing to do the same job. You're working on your mind, no difference. But you're working at a deeper level, and now you're connecting to others. And so eventually, having accomplished this, you can go to postgraduate, and that's Tantra. So another way of describing these two, you've got the Hinayana teachings, which is the Theravadan teachings, and those countries are just one of the remaining sub-schools of the Hinayana, the wisdom wing teachings of the Buddha. Then you've got high school, university, and that's the Mahayana. And the Mahayana consists of all the practices of the Bodhisattva path, which is university, and then postgraduate, which is Tantra, the most esoteric, the most advanced, the most sophisticated level of Buddha's teachings. So the Bodhisattva general teachings about how to achieve love and compassion, bodhicitta, and Tantra, they're the compassion wing. That's the Mahayana component of the teachings. And so if you're on this entire course, you go all the way to the postgraduate. And so the practice we're doing here of visualizing Vajrasattva, the Buddha in this particular form, that practice, that image of the Buddha, this manifestation of the Buddha is coming from Tantra, from the Mahayana, and from the more advanced levels. That's just where it fits, So in order to do this kind of practice, and to even understand that image of the Buddha, we have to have some sense of the different stages of practice. And we have to have a sense. So one of the key things we need to understand then is the ways in which Buddha manifests. So, okay, the actual meaning of the word Buddha it's a word used to refer to a fully developed mind. That's it, an omniscient mind. A mind that's fully developed in the wisdom wing and the compassion wing. A mind that's fully developed in wisdom, which means that mind sees that which exists without mistake. Buddha would call that omniscience. And that is the potential of all minds. Plus, the complete development of all the positive qualities, essentially compassion, love, and all the others. Fully developed in these essential two qualities, wisdom and compassion. Fully developed. That's a Buddha. That consciousness, that mind, which is not physical, because mind is not physical, being now a Buddha, that mind doesn't need shape and form. That mind is not physical, pervades the universe, knows that which exists, is wherever there is existence. When I was brought up a Catholic, I used to love the idea of God being everywhere. This is a very similar idea. All-knowing, all-seeing, all-powerful, all-loving, all-compassionate energy, if you like, consciousness, Buddha would call it, fully developed, that is wherever there is existence. It cannot not be. How can something not physical, which is completely clear, not be wherever there is existence? This is nature. That's what actual Buddha is. That's the actual meaning of Buddha. Now, what good is that to, peanuts like us, who are as thick as posts and need help? So because of these Buddhas, who are regular people, who are regular guys like you and me, regular sentient beings, who worked for countless lives to accomplish this goal, who worked on this path and graduated as a Buddha, that's where you graduate finally, then because of this immense wish to benefit sentient beings, which is what propelled them for life after life after life to do this job of becoming a Buddha, then of course they will do whatever needs to be done to benefit all the suffering mothers. So the way they need to do that, the key way, is to manifest in a body that we can recognize. So there's two forms, if you like, two bodies, two types of forms in which the Buddha mind does manifest to benefit sentient beings. So one is the form of the monk. That's the classic image of the Buddha, isn't it? The Buddha. When we think the Buddha, we think the monk. The form of Shakyamuni Buddha, the person who was the prince who went off and left home and followed all his Hindu teachers and then kept on moving and then got enlightened and then taught for the last 50 years of his life, walking around in his yellow robe. You know, that's the image we have of the Buddha. Well, that's the way Buddha mind manifests in the wisdom wing level, in the Hinayana level. And that's related to that level of practice, which is all about controlling your body and speech first, behaving nicely, abiding by the laws of karma, not harming sentient beings, not bad-mouthing, not killing, not lying, not stealing, not gossiping, not rubbishing, not rabbiting on, controlling your body and speech, which is behavior, so which is junior school. Then you get to high school where now you're ready to actually start changing your mind through meditation, because you harness the crazy energy of your physical, and then you transform your mind. Well, the Buddha, the monk, is the manifestation of that level of practice. Then you've got the Mahayana, the Bodhisattva path, the compassion wing. And then the way Buddha manifests in that level of teachings is as in the Bodhisattva aspect, as they call it. And that's all the different forms we see when you come to Tibetan places, you know, all these fancy-looking drawings with ladies and gentlemen and many arms and many legs and different colours, and some peaceful, some sweet and some scary and all the rest, right? Thousands of them. This is the, quotes, Bodhisattva aspect. And where that's come from historically, it's the royal aspect in India, because clearly Buddhism grew out of India, you know. That's the royal aspect, the aristocratic, with all the jewellery and the beautiful hair, the long hair, the girls and the boys both, you know. That's where that image has come from. And these Tibetans haven't changed this. They've developed their own style, but they haven't changed that way of depicting Buddha at the Bodhisattva level. And so basically, it's all of it psychology. All these images represent different qualities, two kinds in Tantra, two kinds. They're representing different psychological qualities. First, those that we're trying to cultivate, wisdom, love, compassion, and those that we're trying to purify. Attachment, anger, pride, etc. All the quotes unquotes deities. It's just a term they use in Tantra, in the Bodhisattva path, but it's synonymous with the word Buddha. Just for some reason they use the word deity. It's synonymous with the word Buddha. That's all. And there are countless manifestations of Buddha mind. You could say there is one Buddha mind. So when you become Buddha, and I become Buddha, and Fred becomes Buddha, we're not bumping into each other in our formless, all-pervading consciousness. You could argue that it's the same Buddha. But there are trillions of manifestations of Buddha mind, you know, and each of us becomes our own Buddha. And then we manifest in different forms and shapes for as long as time exists for the sake of sentient beings. That's our job. So Buddha manifests in these two different ways, all according to the levels of teachings. The first one, the Hinayana path, the Theravadan level, the country is called Theravadan Dharma, Buddhism, the form of the Buddha, the classic form of the Buddha, the image of the Buddha. He represents the first two stages of practice, controlling your body, speech, and mind, which is the wisdom wing. And then in the compassion wing, and these are expressed in the level of Tantra, which is the postgraduate level of the Mahayana, in these other aspects, countless of them. But that's all, Buddha is Buddha, you know, just different ways and forms that the Buddha manifests to show us our potential. Okay, so you can summarize, you can sum up all the countless different Buddhas in Tantra into one. I remember when I first heard the name Vajradhara, or in Tibetan, Dorji Chung, I really liked his name. I asked Lama Yeshe, who is Dorji Chung Lama? Who is Vajradhara? He said, oh, he's the biggest Buddha here. I remember feeling very proud that I liked the biggest Buddha, you know. And so it was such a sweet answer, instead of some deep intellectual answer, you know, the biggest Buddha, he said. And who Vajradhara is, if Shakyamuni Buddha is the form that Buddha mind manifests as in sutra, another way to call this is this No, well, in the Hinayana teachings, in the wisdom wing, the monk, then the form that the essence of all these Buddhas in the tantric aspect, in the bodhisattva aspect, is called Vajradhara. And you see him in either with his consort or plain, single, without a consort. We can describe this too. So then that's Vajradhara. He's blue, and he represents. He's the manifestation of Buddha in Tantra. Shakyamuni, the monk, is the manifestation of Buddha in the Hinayana teachings. Do you understand? And so Vajrasattva. So if you have like a family tree thing, you've got Buddha. And the word there, never mind all the Sanskrit words, but the word Dharmakaya, it's just a Sanskrit word. It refers to this consciousness, Buddha consciousness. So there you've got Buddha, just Buddha mind. Then underneath this, you've got the manifestations of Buddha. And so you've got Sutra, the Shakyamuni Buddha one, and you've got Vajradhara. And here's Tantra. Then under here, you have all these other thousands of Buddhas. They're all, you could say, manifestations of Vajradhara. You could say it like that. But they all refer to the same thing, enlightened mind. So basically, this is just really sophisticated psychology. You know, if you practice Tara, for example, Tara's female. She's many different colours. And there's the one that's most popular, she's green. So she represents a particular characteristic of enlightened mind. You could say enlightened mind has three essential characteristics: wisdom, compassion, and power. So there's the wisdom, there's compassion, which is the real point, which is the wish to benefit others. This huge drive, spontaneous wish to only benefit others. Then you need the wisdom to know how, but then you need the power to do it. You've got to have these three. There's a way of dividing the energy of an enlightened being. Compassion that wishes to help others, the wisdom to know how to help others, and the ability to do it. Well, Chenrezig, or Avalokitesvara, is this classic image that the Tibetans all love very much. He's the manifestation of compassion. Manjushri, Manju, gentle voice. Shri is like Lord or something. Manju. Jamyang in Tibetan, gentle voice. He's the manifestation of wisdom. Orange body, holding a sword, cutting through ignorance, this kind of thing. So it's just a visual language. And once you learn it, it makes sense. Tara is an example. There's a couple. She is the manifestation of power, action energy. Often the female ones are considered to be action energy, So she's the one, she's called the liberator from the fears of samsara. Liberator, Tara in Tibetan, or Doma in Tibetan, Tara in Sanskrit. Liberator. They often refer to as the liberator from the fears of samsara. We'll discuss that. So she represents this power, this ability to act, to put the compassion and wisdom into practice, But of course, when you look at it first, who would know this? You just see this complicated, weird, who would know what country it came from? You just can't tell. The strange little kind of mountains and funny flowers and a multicolored lotus and strange naked ladies. I mean, who would know it means compassion or wisdom? Well, of course we don't know it. It's not a language we talk. If you've never heard French before, you wouldn't know the words, would you? They're just sounds coming out of a person's mouth. But once you learn the meaning, then you recognize it. Well, same here. You just learn the meaning. That's all it means, You learn the meaning of those ones. And what you're doing when you do these practices, which is what we're going to do with Vajrasattva, you're basically visualizing it out there. And then you do certain types of visualizations, of purifying your mind. And then you visualize that energy coming with and you merging with it. So what you're doing in these kinds of practices, which is what the essence of the tantric practices is you're practicing becoming the Buddha. You're practicing seeing yourself as the Buddha. So the point in all the Lam Rim and all the stages of the path and all the teachings of the Buddha, starting from grade 1 all the way through to postgraduate, the purpose is the same. Is to become a Buddha. Every single word of it, every single practice, every single concept, every phrase. It's like the recipes in a book. If there's anything in that recipe that doesn't help you get a cake, then clearly you've been cheated. Give the book back, They didn't do their research. So everything in the path, everything in the teachings has to lead you inexorably to the development of your Buddhahood. And if there's anything in there that takes you off that doesn't lead you to this, that isn't helpful to that, then it's not valid. And it's so important to understand this. Initially, obviously, we might not know whether it's valid when it's a brand new type of thing. It's very puzzling to us. But we have to take that as our basis and understand that it ought to be this. Just like you've never done cooking before, you have to act on the assumption that that book you're buying will lead you to learn how to cook. Otherwise you'd be very confused. So the purpose of all the teachings, whether you're doing grade 1, controlling your body, not lying, controlling your speech and deciding not to lie, or high school, when you're sitting in the kitchen doing the dishes and you're controlling your anger, that's high school, working on your mind. Whether you're doing that, whether you love having forgiveness and compassion, which is university, or whether you're visualizing yourself as Tara and having courage to get past all your misery, Tantra, you're doing the same job, just different stages, according to your capacity. And like any decent course, it's taught according to capacity, isn't it? It's reasonable. And we're very good at this, of putting information together in terms of a course, because we're brilliant at this in our culture. We know how to learn things very well. We call it education. Well, this is what we're doing if we're being a Buddhist. And this is certainly the way it's presented in Tibetan Buddhism. Okay, so another way to talk about practice is in terms of, there are two kinds of practice. There are those practices that they call purification. It's like pulling out the weeds. And there are those practices that are called, quotes, creating merit, which is like growing the flowers. So using that analogy, perfectly reasonable. If you walk out to your garden and it's packed solid with weeds and junk and brambles and rubbish, you can't possibly start growing beautiful flowers, can you? You've got to do a lot of purification first. You've got to pull the junk out of the way. You've got to dig deep. And this is the point in Buddhism. This is what the Buddha would say, because our minds, and this is really extremely helpful to understand, because for so long, the Buddha would say, countless lives, we have been filling our gardens with weeds. Our gardens are thick with junk, our minds, with old habits, with misconceptions, with junky views, the karmic imprints of the harm we've done, of all the negativity, of all the nonsense, which is the default mode we've been in for a long time. So it's not possible just to go off and grow the flowers. You've got to do an awful lot of purification that clears the way. Conceptually, completely makes sense. And this type of practice here, Vajrasattva, is said to be one of the most potent visualization practices for that we're having that function. But it's done in the context of the teachings on karma. And that's really crucial to understand. And karma is in junior school. The teachings about karma, the nuts and bolts of the universe, of why suffering, why happiness, what causes this, what causes that, that's in junior school. And this is the first, abiding by the laws of karma, quote unquote, is the first level of practice. Already stupendous. So the visualization practice that we do in the Tibetan tradition of Vajrasattva is combined with the understanding of karma. So the practice is referred to as the 4 opponent powers. So in your notes, one of the teachings in there is about this. And we're going to discuss this, because that's really, the clearer we have that understanding, the more the purification practice, such practices like Vajrasattva, make complete sense. And the more urgent we have a sense of the need to do these practices. As Lama Rinpoche says, we are insane not to do this practice every day. But it's really important to have a proper context for it, to understand why the necessity, why the sense of urgency. Well, and that means we have to understand the mind, and we have to understand how karma works. These are fundamental. Mind technically is taught in high school. You work on your mind in high school. In junior school, where you're abiding by the laws of karma, that's mainly about controlling your body and speech, which is where we interact with others, isn't it? And it's with our body and speech that we harm or benefit others. Clearly, what's in the mind is the source of it. But we've got to harness the first level of energy, which is behavior, which is body and speech. It's very reasonable. And immediately, of course, what benefits is your mind. If you don't say those angry words, then right there, you just didn't feed the anger. So controlling body and speech seems so simple, kind of boring almost. Just like what your grandmother told you, behave nicely. We think, oh no, I want to be a Buddhist, I want to meditate, Well, forget meditation, forget the high school, if you can't even do junior school. How can you possibly look into your mind if you're bad-mouthing all the time, talking about people behind their backs and getting angry and upset and going on about things and uncontrolled, How can you possibly work with your mind? You can't. You've got to calm the crazy energy of the body and speech down first, which is itself a stupendous job. Huge. So, okay, in order to understand how we have to purify our mind, and indeed, in order to understand how we have to, quote, create merit, which means do virtuous things, grow the flowers, we need to understand karma and the mind. These are like the sort of the pillars, the fundamentals, the nuts and bolts of Buddha's explanation of the universe. Because essentially that's what Buddhism is. It's a worldview, basically. Again, contrary to the idea that we tend to have about spiritual paths, that it's some kind of, thing sort of a random thing that occurs, or you have a spiritual experience, which is a very common way that people think of spiritual. It's actually, no, it's like I said before, it's got to be coherent. So basically, if we're brought up as in the West, we're usually brought up as materialists. We might be Christian. So we've either got a Christian view, you might have a Muslim view, you might have a communist view, you might have merely the materialist view. We tend to all have that one, but that might be our main philosophy. We might say, oh, I don't believe in anything. Well, what a joke. Of course you do. You've got a really highly developed philosophy in your mind about the way the universe is, called materialism. Well, called samsara, actually. We're all samsarists, basically. We have a very detailed philosophy of the way the world is. And what is the philosophy of samsara? That's the one that's the default mode in our minds, so much so that we don't even think, this is the point, that we don't even think we have a view about things. We just think this is the way the world is. So that the samsaric philosophy, which is the one that's the default mode for all of us, is that I didn't ask to get born. My mother made me, my father made me. I'm just a bunch of, chemicals, physical. And it's not my fault. All these things, this way we feel every day. And things are random, no one knows why. Happiness comes from other people, suffering comes from other people. So when we have attachment, we get the nice things, aversion to the ugly things, and this is how we spend our lives. These assumptions we have. Our minds are they're deep with these assumptions. And so it's really hard, but this is the job, to unpack these assumptions. So what we're trying to do here, say for a person who is committed to being a Buddhist, certainly in this tradition, that's what I'm saying, then you're taking on board this new world view. Well, new for us. I don't know for myself personally. I'm really into the big picture. I like that. I'm always my life. I wanted the big picture. I was brought up a Catholic. That was my main trip. Then I became a hippie. Then I was like a communist, then like a feminist, all these different views of the world, ways of describing the whats and the whys of things, the nuts and bolts of things. So I kept moving until I bumped into these lamas, in Queensland. Lama Yeshe, Lamas Open, my teachers. And then I began to hear this Buddhist worldview, this explanation of what a person is, what causes that person to come into being, the function of the mind, what the mind is, how it works, what karma is, how it works. It's this worldview, basically, And so one way you could say of being a Buddhist, quote unquote, is you're internalizing that worldview. You're learning to think differently. We're learning to think differently. It comes down to this. And this is a really interesting point of the Buddha's teachings. We can spend the rest of the time just on this point. And this is a crucial one for us to get. And this is why the mind for the Buddha is absolutely central. It's the center of everything. Mind or consciousness, which is not physical, which doesn't come from a creator, which doesn't come from your mummy or daddy, which is not a function of your body, intimately connected to your body, but not a function of your body, and is a beginningless continuity of mental moments that goes to far more subtle levels and has this astonishing potential to become perfect. It's beginningless and endless. This is the way Buddha talks about the mind. Everything in Buddhism is based upon this assumption. So it's a big ask to think about that. We could take it as our working hypothesis, basically, And then what runs the mind, and therefore what runs the universe for the Buddha, is the word he uses to refer to that is the word karma. Like I mentioned yesterday, we use that very colloquially. Strictly speaking, the word karma actually really means the word intention. It's what the mind does from moment to moment. And all Buddha's saying, all he's saying, is that what the mind does from moment to moment is the main cause of your experiences in the future. We are the ones who created ourselves, basically. We come into this world, Buddha would say, fully programmed with all the imprints, all the seeds, all the programming in our mind of what our mind has done before. And this, for the Buddha, is the main cause of all experiences, of all happiness, and of all suffering. It's a simple point, but so utterly opposite to what we assume. We really got to squeeze our brain, as Rami Yeshe puts it, to really get it clear intellectually first. But basically, minds run the show. So this is why, for the Buddha, we absolutely have to know the mind, our mind, because that's where you're going to do the work. That's where the workshop is, as Lama's overseas. It's a huge point. And karma is what minds do, basically, from moment to moment. And then, on the basis of what's in your mind, your body and speech, which are the servants of your mind, they do the wishes of your mind, don't they? It's obvious. So it's obvious on this earth, the body and speech do the harm and do the benefiting. But where do they come from? The mind. The mind has a kind thought, and so the mouth smiles. The mind has an angry thought, and your mouth, you look miserable. Your mind has an angry thought, and the fist goes out. It's sort of really obvious. It's stating something so obvious, but we're so caught up in the body, we just don't even notice the mind. And of course, because we think the mind is physical, and then because we think mummy and daddy are the main cause of who I am, and what goes on out there is the main cause of who I am, which is the samsaric philosophy, which is the one we're all living in right now. And that's why when I said last night, we go to our therapist and you discuss your problems, where does your therapist help you look for the causes of your problems, for the source? Obviously, into the body, the chemicals, the DNA, the genes, and this and that, and to the parents and the past. That's where we look. Why? Because that's where we think the source of everything is. Buddha, no. This is where he's fundamentally different. You can look into what your mummy did and daddy did. That's very helpful. But finally, where you must look is into your mind itself, your own mind itself. You must plumb the depths of your own mind. Not to look for something that we're so convinced that some event in the past is why I do this. No. You look into your mind itself right now. You look into your mind right now. It's not mysterious. It is for us, but it's not complicated. You look into what is arising in your mind. And then we have to learn to distinguish in that mind the difference between the neuroses and the virtues. And we'll discuss this. Because the neuroses are why we're suffering and why we harm others. And the virtues are why we're happy and why we help others. This is what we have to do. And so this is the process of karma, quote unquote, creating karma. Every microsecond of what you say or think first and then do and say is a karma. Another way to translate it is the word an action. It leaves an imprint, it programs you basically. Every microsecond of what you think and do and say basically programs you. That's it. It's not complicated. So whatever you program yourself with is what will manifest in the future. Like I said last night, it's not so complicated. We understand this process really well. We call it education. If you sit there, internalizing music, going to school, learning all about Bach and Mozart, and all these people, learning all these complicated theories about, musical theory, and then playing the piano for 30 years, guess what? You've created a really good pianist, haven't you? It's not mysterious. Who did the work? You did. And which part of you? Your mind. Your fingers wouldn't do anything if your mind didn't have music in it. It's obvious the mind is the boss. The fingers play the music, but they'd be sitting there silent if your mind didn't have music in it. That's karma. That's what cause and effect is. It's called karma. That's what it means, actually, is what your mind does produces you. So what your mind did for 30 years, working real hard at music, produced your musician. It's hardly rocket science. Well, your anger and your love and your kindness and your jealousy and your depression is what has produced the you of now. We don't look there. We think, we think someone else gave me the anger. Someone else did that thing, that's why I'm jealous. We think the jealousy is a product of your action. The anger is a product of my genes. Buddha says completely mistaken. It doesn't mean they don't play a role. They clearly play a role, but we're not describing it accurately, he'd say. And as long as we don't get to the mind itself, and therefore understand this process of karma, he says we will never, ever, 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 ever stop suffering. We will never, ever, ever, ever achieve our potential for perfection. So understanding karma and the mind, because they're utterly linked, because what the mind does is what karma is. This is the essence of being a Buddhist. This is the basis of your practice. Without understanding these two, we don't understand Buddhism at all. It's just a confusing set of weirdo things, you know. Okay, so let's look at karma. And so we'll start looking, we'll look at karma now and go into how why we need to purify it. Then we can go into it gradually over the days, you know, and we'll be doing that in the first time we do the meditation practice. We'll have a break, then we'll do the meditation practice. We'll give it a go. So let's discuss this idea of karma and how it ripens and then how we purify it. Okay, so basically, Buddha says this mind of ours, consciousness, mind, these are used synonymously. Every second, every microsecond is doing something. And it's running, as we know, it's running on autopilot. We don't sit there thinking, I think I better have a thought now. We just, they come, don't they? They're there running mad like crazy the whole time. Uncontrolled thoughts. You know? So basically the Buddha says the contents of this mind of ours is quite simple. We can divide it into three categories. There are those that are virtuous states of mind, or positive, or productive, or useful, or beneficial states of mind, which the Buddha would say are at the core of our being and are who we really are. And they are necessarily the source of joy and virtue, the source of joy in me and the cause of why I help others. Then you've got so-called negative states of mind with the exact opposite. They're completely neurotic, they're delusional, they're disturbing, they're the source of my pain and the source of why I harm others. And then acting upon them leaves seeds in my mind that will ripen as my suffering in the future. So when I act upon my virtuous state of minds, that leaves seeds in my mind that will ripen in the future as my happiness. This for Buddha is the fundamental law, this natural law. It's like a natural law, like botany or gravity. He didn't make it up. No one's running it. It doesn't need anybody to run it. It just occurs. It's natural. It occurs. Which is a big shock for us because we're so used to believing morality, in seeing morality in terms of punishment and reward, and somebody up there pulling the strings. You know, there's no dualistic idea like that at all in Buddhism, which takes time to think about. So if it's true that negative states of mind and actions done on the basis of them with our body and speech leave imprints in my mind that will ripen as my future suffering, and then we figure, I don't want suffering, hey, I'm sick of suffering, we had better learn to know exactly what they are, so we stop growing, we stop planting them in the grounds. It's sort of awfully obvious. And if it's true that the virtuous states of mind and the actions done on the basis of them leave imprints in the mind that will ripen as my future happiness, and given that, yep, I want happiness, please, no probs, then I'd better learn to know what they are. This is the crucial job of being a Buddhist, to distinguish between the virtues and the non-virtues, the negative states of mind and the positive states of mind. It's an absolutely technical, disciplined, precise, necessary job to be done, not some mystical, emotional thing. It really demands immense hard work. But you've got to start with a theory. You can't possibly play Bach if you don't have a theory. You can't possibly play Bach without understanding the theory of music. You can't possibly. Well, you can't possibly do this job of meditating, being your own therapist, and actually unpacking and unraveling your mind unless you know what is going on in your mind. You can use Jung as your basis if you want to. You can use Freud as you wish. You can use your own model. No one says you have to use Buddhas, but here we're talking Buddhas. And he's got this very distinct, unique way of presenting how the mind functions. And these are technical terms, not kind of moralistic, you know, negative, positive. They're technical terms. This is the absolutely fundamental job we have to do. The very first level of the job, of course, is the one abiding by the laws of karma. Really just means controlling your body and speech before we even begin to get to the mind. So I'm going back and forth. The mind is really high school. Karma, the beginnings of abiding by the laws of karma, which is about mainly controlling your body and speech, that's junior school. So we'll go back and forth. So the very first level, like I'm saying, is the Buddha has got this little checklist of 10 don'ts. His recommendations, okay? And what are they? We're awfully familiar with them. There's some actions he would recommend we don't do of the body. He would suggest don't kill, don't lie. No, don't kill, don't take things that haven't been given to you, and don't misuse your body sexually to harm others, 3 actions of the body to begin to control. Now, obviously, when we unpack those actions, which we will do now, we can see that they're motivated by delusions. And that's the key to understand. We need to understand that. Then you've got 4 actions of your speech. One is to not rabbit on about nothing. They call it idle talk. I like to call it rabbit on about nothing. This uncontrolled kind of rabbiting on where we have this anxious need to go blah, That's one way of uncontrolled, of negative speech, call it this way. Then you've got the speech that's not true, conscious lying speech. Then you've got harsh speech, it's really quite distressing for other people to hear, isn't it? And then you've got, I think, one of the worst ones we all do is talk bad things about people behind their backs. We spend our life doing that. We can't wait to get home to talk about the mean person at work. We all talk about politicians like it's some virtue to speak false all the time. We just never stop vomiting out the mouth. This is just the 7 actions. And this is so simple, it's embarrassing. But if we could truly decide, and this is junior school level of practice, to never kill, never cheat on our partner, never, misuse your body with sexual attachment, never take things that don't belong, never rabbit on about nothing, never say things that aren't true, never use harsh speech, and never talk bad things about people behind their backs, you'd have the life of a saint. You'd be miraculous. You'd be the most wonderful human being. You'd be instantly more peaceful because your mind would calm down because you stop all the feeding of it. People would adore you. You'd be such fun to be around. They would trust you and love you. It's like miraculous. And this is junior school. Before you even begin to look at your mind. It's unbelievable. So we should not underestimate. It just sounds so boring, The 10 non-virtues. Oh, yeah. Don't lie, don't kill. Yeah, all right. But it's unbelievable, actually. Okay, but let's look at this because it's so interesting. The normal view we have of morality, or when someone says, don't do this, the usual view we have is that's religion, or it's mummy. So we think of morality as something that someone from on high, God, the judge, the police, or mummy, tell us not to do. So this is why we have this default knee-jerk reaction. Well, who do you think you are telling me what to do? I'm going to do what I like, is how we think. We assume it's some information coming from on high squashed upon us. That's why we think we can, quote, get away with something. Because this is the dualistic view we have about morality. We assume it's about punishment and reward. So that's why we hide our bad things. And we're dying for people to see us being good. Because we're desperate for the praise, but we don't want the criticism. So we have already in our bones this dualistic view of morality. You understand what I'm saying? It's really deep inside us. And that's why we get all resentful if we're told don't do this and don't do this and don't do that, because we assume it's something imposed from the outside. The Buddha's view of morality is quite different, and it really does demand some kind of self-respect and maturity to even hear it. Buddha says it's got nothing to do with, the fact that he says don't kill. The reason he says it isn't because, the reason he says don't kill isn't because he says so. And this is the difference between, let's say, this and when I was a Catholic, for example. Now, I'm not criticizing, but it's a very different view. I remember asking a Catholic priest friend of mine, what is a sin by definition? And he said, it's going against the will of God. In other words, it's doing what God said not to do. That's what makes it bad. He said there is some natural law. that killing itself naturally is wrong, but the main reason it's wrong is because God said not to do it. And that's the view we have of morality. And so then, nothing wrong with that if we can treat it with respect. But because we get guilty and shamed and angry and upset and resentful, we misuse it. How marvelous if you have such faith in God and you are accepting God's role and you do what God says and you're happy to do what God says, you'll be a very happy person. But we have conflict because we are scared and we get guilty and then we blame God or blame mummy and daddy or somebody else, which is just very childish. Guilt, we blame ourselves. It's very childish. Now, the Buddha's view is that karma, actions, is a natural law. It is, so he says don't kill because, okay, you ask the Buddha, what is a sin? What is a negative action? It's a very simple answer. It's an action that harms another. It's so simple, it's a joke. So basically, it's a conventional reality. We do some research, we do a survey in this room. We all agree we don't like having our money stolen. We don't like having people say rude words to us. We don't want to be harmed and kicked in the teeth or killed. We'll all agree to that quite quickly. Then that's what we can all come up with, an agreement, can't we? We can all shake hands on it. So in other words, we've agreed on that's what morality is. And that's all morality is. It's a convention, Buddha says. It's some conventional reality that upon agreement, we as a group, as a society, as a country, have come up with. It's not set in stone. It's not inherent, in other words. This is really relating to emptiness. There's nothing inherent about an action being negative in itself, or because God said it is. Nothing to do with that. Buddha says you do your research. You check up on the dogs and the ants and the giraffes and the humans. They're all the same. They don't want to be harmed. So that's why he says that's a negative action. Now, there's an extra component here for why he suggests not to do it. And this is a crucial point to understand. This is fundamental to purification process. Fundamental. So the reason he recommends you don't kill is because that will harm you. You define a negative action in terms of it's harming another, but he says don't do it because it'll harm you, and that's what we have to look at. Let's understand that logically. When we can understand this logically, we can then understand why we need to purify our minds for our own sake, not out of guilt or because somebody said so, which is the view we tend to have. So let's analyze it. It's not complicated. It's very logical, actually. So when you do any action, okay, there are 4 ways. I'm going to do different things here. There are 4 ways in which any actions of body, speech, and mind, and you can use the word here synonymous with the word karma, any actions of body, speech, and mind. There are 4 ways that any of all of our actions of body, speech, and mind can ripen in the future. The seeds we plant when we say and do those things. There are 4 ways in which they can ripen in the future. One is the type of rebirth. So an action, any action we do that's called a complete action, it has 4 main components. Any action that's got those 4, you sow that seed in your mind, that will grow in your mind, and then like all seeds will multiply and will ripen as many fruits of types of rebirth. Then the other 3 ways that karma ripens, quote unquote, is like residual results of those. And so the second way your karma will ripen is the tendency to keep doing it. So when we look into our minds, and we're programmed with all our, many of our past tendencies have come together, and then right there, the time of conception, and then as we develop into the person we've become in this life, what a person is, isn't it, is made up of those tendencies. Whether you've got Hitler tendencies or Mother Teresa's tendencies, they're your tendencies from your past habit of having said or done or thought them before. You created yourself quite literally, you could say this, from having said and done and thought things. The habit to keep doing, that's the second way, quotes, karma ripens. The third one is called experiences. So it's all the stuff that happens to you. how people see you, how they treat you, they love you, they hate you, they rape you, they give you, they take from you, whatever it might be. This is the third way in which our actions of the past ripen in the present. And the fourth one is called environmental karma, the very way the physical world impacts upon us. So we use a really simple example of killing. So two things I want to do here is look at the four ways that killing ripens, and then go into, when we do an action of killing, look at the components that are there that make it a negative action. Because it's not set in stone. It's also, like everything, empty of inherent existence. It's a convention. So, okay, let's say, what's your name? Who? Jotara, okay. That's Jotara, okay? So Jotara has a little mouse in her kitchen. And I have a mouse in my kitchen. And you have a mouse in your kitchen with a green jumper. Who's you? The gentleman. You, sweetheart. Tim. Okay, Tim has a mouse in his kitchen. Okay, three little mice in three kitchens. And this is a Mahayana explanation. So I have a mouse in my kitchen, and I see the mouse, and I go, "Oh, bloody mice!" and I want to kill it. Now that's a normal response, isn't it? Most people don't like mice. You think, oh, yuck. And the usual one is because we don't think about it too much in our culture. We think killing them is the way to get rid of them. That's just how it is. Most people kill something. Very few religions even. It's only really Buddhism and a few others. Jainism maybe, isn't it, in India, would say don't kill any creature. We'll go into this. So then my response would be a natural one. We'd call it natural. Oh, mice. I don't want a mouse in my kitchen. I'm going to kill the mouse. So then Jotara has a mouse. Now let's look at mine first. Okay, so first thing is, okay, now, for this action of killing that I will do to be called a complete action of killing, such that it leaves imprints in my mind and I don't pull it out and it grows and grows, it will ripen as many types of rebirth. And because it's a negative action, it will ripen as suffering rebirths. So, okay, the four components that have to be there when I do it to be a complete negative action. The first is there is the intention. And this is the meaning of the word karma. Remember this. The meaning of the word karma is intention. An intention, I will kill the mouse. There has to be a mouse there, the object. I have to do the action or get someone else to do it for me. And then there has to be the result, a dead mouse, before I die. Strictly speaking, that's a complete action of killing. But let's unpack it more to look at the logic of what, this is the point, of what makes it a negative action when I do it. We tend to think, oh, well, killing's just wrong, we'll say. That's seeing it as inherent. It's not like that. It's a dependent arising. It's a conventional agreement. It's not coming from on high. We hear this stuff as coming from on high, fully developed, plonked on top of us, which is the meaning of seeing things as inherent, which we'll talk about. But it's a convention. It's a dependent arising. So, what causes me to what's behind my intention? Why do I say I will kill the mouse? It's hardly rocket science. I have aversion. There's three main delusions. We'll get into the mind more deeply. You've got this root ignorance, which is the grasping at the self. And that gives rise to effectively the main cause of our suffering day to day, which is attachment. And attachment, one of its functions, is to embellish the deliciousness of something. So if I had attachment for that mouse, it was my pet mouse, then of course I wouldn't say I will kill it. I'd run to it and go, oh, I must save it. Of course. It would look delicious to me. I'd think, oh, poor little mouse. I have attachment to the mouse because it's my pet mouse, But I don't. It's an ugly little, smelly little foreign mouse. How dare it be in my kitchen? So because of my attachment to my clean kitchen, because anger, I then have aversion, don't I, to the mouse, which is anger. Mild version of anger maybe, but it's anger. So we have attachment to get what we want, and the millisecond it doesn't get what it wants, anger arises. So in this case, because of my attachment to a mouse-free kitchen, I'm angry with the mouse. So that usually expresses itself, when it's strong anger, is as the wish to harm the mouse, doesn't it? It's reasonable. That's the logic of what makes it a bad action. Now look at Jotara's. This is the point. Jotara. Jotara. Okay. So look at Jotara. She has a mouse in her kitchen. She sees the mouse, but she has compassion instead. She sees the mouse as suffering. She hurt it. She didn't mean to. And she's full of compassion. So her heart is full of the wish to help the mouse. And then she says, oh, I better kill it, because that's what we do in the world. We think we'll stop the mouse's life. That will stop its suffering. So she says the same thing, I will kill the mouse. But look at her action right there without going further. There are completely opposite actions. The intention is exactly the same, I will kill the mouse. But look what motivates my intention and look what motivates her intention. This motivation is the point. This is what makes what we do negative or positive. It's not the action itself, but because we're so familiar, my motivation of aversion and my intention to kill are so packed together, we don't even notice it. We don't break them down. We need to see that, and this is why in the world the killing that most people do is bad. Not because it's set in stone bad. So let's finish the story. So I am angry with the mouse. How dare it be there? I have aversion, this stinking mouse. Then I intend I will kill it. And my thought I will kill, which is the boss thought, propelled by the motivation, causes my hand to get the thing and go whack. Then I see dead mouse and I rejoice. That's a complete action of killing. A negative action of killing. A negative action of killing. And what made it negative isn't the fact that the mouse got hurt. That does play a role. The key factor here for why when I did that action, I create negative karma is not because it's set in stone, or even because the mouse suffered, but because I wanted to harm it, because of my motivation. That's why Jotara's is a completely different action. She wants to help the mouse. So she thinks, mistakenly, we should look at this in a minute. We'll look at this in a second. We're discussing the karma that I create and the karma that Jotara creates. The action, Buddha says, killing's not cool, sentient beings don't like it. And the little mouse don't like it, it's true. But we're looking now at what it is that causes the karma we create when we do an action. It's our motivation. So she wants to help the mouse. She kills the mouse. The mouse is there and the mouse dies. 2 dead mice. They don't care. They both got the result of their karma. But I created negative karma because I wanted to harm the mouse. She created virtuous karma because she wanted to help the mouse. Now, let's look at her action. The Buddha would say that the mouse's mind will continue after it dies and will take another rebirth. So she had compassion, but she didn't have wisdom. So as the Dalai Lama says, compassion is not enough. You need wisdom. Or as Rama Zopa says, meaning well is not enough. You need wisdom. So you can say, from her point of view, she's fine. She created virtuous karma. But from the mouse, she probably put it from the frying pan into the fire. So she didn't help the mouse at all. And you ought to ask the question, which we never do, well, I wonder if I did help the mouse. But obviously because we're caught up in the materialist view, and most people don't think of reincarnation, and they would obviously think and deduce that the mouse's suffering will stop when you kill it, which is behind euthanasia and all that stuff, isn't it? Well, Buddha would have this other view. So because you haven't got wisdom, then the better thing would have been for Jotara, indeed the compassion is marvellous. Try and keep the mouse supported, help it, say mantras, let it die peacefully. Because you don't, not because it's good for it to suffer, but because you don't have the wisdom to know its karma. It's a practical thing. But the key point I'm making here is really to point out the function of motivation behind intention, which is so packed we mostly never notice it. That's what makes our actions negative. And we're talking the negative ones here. And because she didn't have a wish to harm, she had the wish to help, even if she harmed the mouse worse. Maybe my mouse went to the higher realms because it heard a mantra playing in my lounge room because my boyfriend's Buddhist. And maybe the mouse was freaking out and had heard this powerful mantra, and that triggered the virtuous karma of my little mouse, whom I'm brutalizing, but it gets a human rebirth. Well, my mouse is much more lucky. Her mouse maybe has more fear and goes to even worse suffering. So in the end, she did more harm to her mouse, even though she created good karma. Are you seeing the point? It's motivation. This is why we have to know our minds. This is why we have to unpack everything in our minds and see our minds and then change our motivation. And now, what's your name? I forget your name, darling. Tim. Okay, now Tim has a mouse, but he doesn't even see it. He's sitting there washing the lettuce, full of good thoughts for his wife, cooking the dinner. And he doesn't see the mouse and he stands on it and the poor mouse dies terrible death. So the first one, there's no intention, is there? Therefore, there's no karma because intention equals karma. And of course, there's no motivation because there's no intention. So there's no karma created. There can't be. Karma equals intention. But there is a mouse, and it dies. Of course, it will be different if he goes, oh, great, I'm glad I killed the mouse. Then he created negative karma. But if he's sorry he killed the mouse, there's no negative karma created. It can't be, because there was no intention. There can't be. There's no intention. So, of course, it's more subtle than all this, but this is really to help us get really, really clear about what does mean karma? What causes to create karma? What does it mean do bad things? What does it mean do good things? It's not fearful. It's not guilt-based. It's not blame-based. It's a logical, practical thing. And that's why we have to know our minds well. Are we communicating? Okay. Any questions so far? At 10:27. Yes. That's right. That's right. Exactly. It's the same as the mouse. We have to analyze it. The person. For us to look on the outside, the only way we can deduce what action she created, what karma she created, is if we are clairvoyant and see her mind. So we can say, that if a person kills themselves out of genuine compassion, it has to be a virtuous. Okay, especially at the time of death. I'm working on a book at the moment, Lam Rim, about how to help people at the time of death. And the thing that about death for the Buddhists is that what arises in your mind, as you know, what arises in your mind at the time before you stop breathing, this is the main one that then triggers the karma that will throw you into the next life. And so you can't say, but we know in general, we call suicide. It's usually not coming because you're completely blissful, is it? No. You're not blissfully happy. You either have fear, depression, anger, hurt, resentment, or whatever. It's not a comfortable. In other words, it is. And don't be moralistic about it. It is a negative action insofar as it's coming from fear and panic and drama. That naturally upsets the mind. That distresses the mind, and that will trigger a negative action because fear. You see, fear is at the basis of all the negative states of mind. That's why they hardly ever talk about it in Buddhist psychology. It is there. It's so assumed, but it's actually massive. That fear is the basis of all the negative states. Even if it's just, I don't want more suffering. It's fear. Aversion. There's fear in all the negative states by definition. And fear, when fear is rising, it triggers another negative karmic seed to ripen because there are trillions of karmic seeds. So depending on that woman, truly whatever is in her mind, you can imagine a situation where a person has genuine compassion to all their people and their friends. They decide, and it could be genuine compassion. You could imagine this. Well, that's fine. It's perfectly fine for yourself. If you put it this way, I'm not trying to say it easily. What I'm meaning is if truly it is compassion, genuine goodness, genuine morality, that's blissful, and that can only ripen a virtue.
So that's different to something showing that virtue there. There's people who actively seek to end their lives because they're very ill.
If it's compassion, if it is compassion, then
not fear.
If it's not fear-based, if it's not delusion, anger, resentment, or fear, or hurt, or don't want, and even to say I don't want suffering, that's called aversion. I'm not going to be horrible. We've just got to look into our minds so clearly. And again, when we remember, it's not punishment or reward. No one's up there pulling the strings. It's a natural thing. Your own mind takes care. You don't need someone to tell you it's going to be good or bad. You don't have to be given permission to do it. It's if it's virtue in the mind. So, for example, there's a big deal about giving organs, and all the lamas asked about it because one of the key things in Buddhism, as you must know, when you die, it's really important to not disturb the body for a couple of days because the mind stays there. I'm reading this outrageous book right now called The Undead. This American scientific writer, unbelievable research about all the organ transplant business, which is a big business, and the horrific things that occur. Because they're so dying to get nice fresh livers and nice fresh hearts, he's saying you get better treatment as when you're a dead person, because they want your organs all nice and fresh than you did when anyway, whatever, it doesn't matter. But there's so many stories about how you're not dead, and you've had your liver. There's this person who was what they have a term, a beating heart cadaver. What's the word? How do you say it? Cadaver, a beating heart cadaver. There's a lot of them, and they love them because they're fresh and tasty, all nice and pink and ruddy and, nice to get transplanted. And they even had this guy's liver cut out, and he became alive again. I mean, there's so many things, to what really is dead. So the Buddhist one would say you're not dead. It could be at least 3 days before the consciousness leaves the body. And so what I'm saying is, what am I saying there? What am I saying there? I got lost now. Quite disturbing, yeah. But why was I saying that now? Yeah, I know, but I don't forget why I brought it up, even in relation to your point. Anyway, no, just the general idea in Buddhism that you...
you were saying it's about the general idea of living body intact in terms of
No, it was early. I don't know why I brought it up in relation to your point about killing yourself. But anyway, whatever. The key point is, whatever arises, in the mind, even before you stop breathing, that's when the karmic seed that will determine your next life will ripen. This is when it will ripen. So, because the mind is getting much more sensitive, the body is breaking down, the senses are ceasing, the mind is becoming more subtle, and so that all these karmic imprints, they're like billions of seeds in the mind. Everything we ever do and say and think leaves a seed. They're all sitting there. And then how you are at the time of your death determines which seed you will ripen. So you can die, you'd be a nice person and freak out at the time of death. It sounds so cruel, but no one's doing it to you because you haven't practiced being patient or practiced morality. And that can automatically will ripen a negative seed, and that'll then throw your consciousness into the next life. And then, so you can't know. In general, we can say we call it suicide. Of course, the biggest trip in our culture is that I have a right. We're so determined about our rights, which is not the main issue, really, but you can't argue about it. It's hard to say it, because you can't be moralistic and tell people, you can't kill yourself because this and that. But it's just sad because we think the main thing is I have a right to do what I want. Isn't it? It's a tricky one. Yeah.
In terms of intention, could you conceivably that a soldier fighting for his or her country wants to go out and kill the enemy out of love?
Sure.
Or
Well, isn't that the usual motivation for all wars? Isn't that the usual motivation for somebody to, because it's based upon attachment to my people? No. You see, it's not based on compassion. The compassion I'm talking about is the person you kill. No, you have aversion for the enemy. Why do people drop bombs on anybody? Because you hurt my people. So I have aversion for you, but compassion for me. That's not compassion. That's just, it began with compassion, but it turns into aversion. That's not compassion at all. It turns into anger. And that's the big mistake. And this is what we're going to go into. But that's because the assumption is there's an innocent victim here. And when we understand the view of karma, which is exactly why the Dalai Lama doesn't do this. It's exactly why. If you did kill yourself out of compassion, I'm not saying you will. I'm not saying that's what people kill themselves. I'm saying if there is compassion there for yourself or for others, but it has to be for yourself. It's got to be a virtue in your mind. But for me to drop a bomb on you, I have to have aversion for you. I have to have. It's because I've got attachment to my people. It's only attachment. I have compassion for my people. Of course I have compassion for my people, but I've only got a compassion for people I'm attached to. So therefore I have aversion for you. It can be possible. Of course it can be. But most of the time we can see the usual dualistic view we have of compassion is for my people, therefore aversion for your people. And that's seen as noble. It could be possible. I'm not saying it wouldn't be. It depends on the person's mind. We know some people in wars who have to do it, have real love and compassion, don't want to harm anybody, and do it with great sadness. That each individual person is different. But the thing that is so easy to fall into the trap of in our culture is it's okay to be angry with the enemy and to want to murder them and brutalize them and rape them, because look at the stories you hear about, I mean, the nobility in war is like a joke. To really do a noble war, you've got to be a very special person, I'd say. It's almost like bodhisattvas. You understand? Because it usually turns into rage and wishing to harm these horrible people who are the enemy, isn't it? So it's a tricky one. Yeah. Uh-huh. What do you mean by that? I'm a bit confused.
One is like, you use the analogy in your school.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Okay. Or it could be like 3 roads.
No, it's not, because the where you're going is different. So if you do junior school, you graduate there. You graduate with virtue in your mind, and you'll get another decent human rebirth. If you graduate from high school, you'll have realized emptiness, and you've quit nirvana, and you've achieved your own liberation. If you graduate from the Mahayana, you become a Buddha and can now bop around the world manifesting, benefiting trillions of sentient beings. So it's up to which goal you want. And you could very easily say their hierarchy. Of course, it's more superior to be a Buddha who's capable of benefiting billions of beings than one person who's zapped into nirvana. Of course, it's obvious. Of course, it's clearly a hierarchy. Do you see what I'm saying? The goals are different, yeah. They're all marvelous, but they're all, and if you're doing the whole path, you go through all of them. Do you see what I'm saying? They're not leading to the same place. Otherwise, why would you have them? They are 3 roads, but it's up to where you want to go. So you might want to get to Bendigo, or you might want to get to Melbourne. You have to decide which is the one you want, which is the goal you want, So the Buddha would say in the Mahayana teachings that every being has the potential to be a Buddha. So why not aim for the best? Why not aim for the final one, beyond which you can't be more? But aiming just to get your liberation from samsara isn't, you can do more, is all he can say, he says. Can you see the point or not? And keep discussing if not. If you can. That's right. That's another discussion, though. But that's another discussion, isn't it? Yeah. People are allowed to have their views. Huh? No, darling, it's all that just, what do you mean as though? According to whom? Who are you talking? This is your views you've read? I'm a bit confused.
Well, if you go to a monk, a wise master, is who I spoke to, who said if you take the Theravada path, that's so slow, you will never reach the.
So what's your actual point then? It seems like a lot of emotion in what you're saying. Can you get to the actual question? What's your point?
The question was, is it a hierarchical system? Which you said yes, it is.
But then what? I know, but would you say back to me what I just answered? Give me back to me what you heard me say the answer, and then I'll see if we're both understanding the same thing. What did I answer?
You said yes.
And so what does that mean, actually? What does it mean?
What it means is that after you choose is important.
No, I don't mean that. What is, okay.
Because the destination at which you arrive will be determined by the path you take.
Precisely. So it's up to each one of us to look at Buddha's teachings and to listen to them carefully and to see, the thing is, they would say we come into this life with our lineage. If a person's got a strong connection. I remember on a train to Dharamsala one time I shared a cabin with these 2 Burmese practitioners. They were Americans. And they were joking about how ridiculous Kala Chakra was. And the Dalai Lama gave them this Kala Chakra book. It was in the 70s, so they had a personal meeting with the Dalai Lama. And he gave them this book on Kala Chakra. And they cracked jokes about how ridiculous it was. Not negative. Please listen. Not negative. I know what you're talking about. Not negative. They were cracking jokes about it. And so there was, obviously for them, their lineage was the Hinayana lineage. They didn't want to know about Tantra. They didn't want to know about even Mahayana. They posit that it does exist, that many Theravada practitioners would say they accept that the Theravada teachings in general do posit the Mahayana, but they would say it's taught this way. That only some people have the potential to be Buddha. Most only have the potential to be liberated. And then the second point they also say, which is very different, is that when you do become a Buddha, or when you become liberated, when you achieve your own nirvana, when you die, you're gone. You're finished. There's nothing left. And that's a very, very, very different teaching. The Mahayana teachings would say that mind is endless. And that secondly, every sentient being has Buddha nature. So this is the Mahayana teaching. What anybody has to look into. Your Theravada friend, if they're negative about Vajrayana, let them be. That's their problem. That's not, but they've got to have their basis for their views. Everybody does. But there's no discussion. There's no argument. You just agree with people. There's no point in arguing. But you've got to look into one has to look into the teachings carefully and look at what we're doing. That's the point. Do you understand? And then respect another. These 2 Burmese, we crack jokes, There's no way I was going to try and convince them. That would be arrogant and absurd. Their lineage was Hinayana, there's no doubt about it. You know. Respect. Do you see what I'm saying? The point. Yeah. Okay. Do you want a break? 10:40. I've been thinking about, before we have the break, I've been thinking about how to do the retreat. And I think it'd be nice if we have silence. Would you all like that? We do retreat mode, sort of like mind your own business, basically. It's kind of called mind your own business. They say yogis and yoginis, you know, meditators walk straight ahead. Don't kind of look left and right like little birds, checking up on everything. You walk straight ahead. You mind your own business. And it's a nice thing to do. So, but what we'll do is, we're going to have like main session in the morning, like now, teachings, a break, and then the meditation. In the afternoon, the same. And then the evening, we'll do the same. Also, we have like maybe two or three, depending, meditations, and then the teaching as well, which is equally important, the whole part of the deal. We'll have silence around, and then there'll be talking in here like we're talking now, and then there'll be discussion, 1 hour discussion group a day where you can talk, okay? So we just see how that goes. And then in the end, if you do talk, it's your business. You know, and if someone else talks, don't get upset with them, that's their business. You be silent, you know, there's plenty of place to be quiet. So what do you think about that? Is that all right? Yeah? Are you happy with that? Anybody not happy with that? I thought so. Why not? Yeah. Yeah, and because the place is big and spacious, you can kind of get quiet. Plenty of places to be quiet. There's something very beneficial, isn't there, about the retreat mode? You know, because you're here on your own, basically. We're in a group, but we're basically here on our own, doing our own thing. And of course, most of you are going to be, the ones who live here, you're going to be sharing rooms, so that gets tricky because we've got this deep impulse to talk if we're close to somebody. You just be rude to each other, okay? Ignore each other. Just ignore each other. Act like you're on your own. It's the best way to be. It's the best way. So have a 20-minute break. I'll see you back here around 11. Is there a little bell ringer? Don't we need bell ringers? No?
I think there is a
There is. So we need the gong at like 5 to 11. Or sort of 11 o'clock or so. Okay. Thank you, people. Go into the retreat mode.